Hello everyone, welcome back to yet another marvelous video. If you grew up in the 90s, chances are you've been familiar with the wild, action-packed world of Universal Soldier. It does make you question at some point, what if the perfect soldier could be built and not born? Engineered in secret labs, programmed to obey, stripped of memory, unleashed on the battlefield. Sounds like a terrifying concept, right? But that nightmare was the backbone of the Universal Soldier franchise. In this video, we're diving into the entire Universal Soldier saga. The movies, the reboots, all the bizarre moments in between, you name it. Let's break it down. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Universal Soldier, 1992, the sci-fi classic that started it all. Released in July 1992, Universal Soldier wasn't aiming for subtlety. It was directed by Roland Emmerich, who would later go on to blow up the White House in Independence Day. This was the movie that paired up two action icons like Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren at the height of their physical prime. Van Damme had just kicked through Kickboxer and Bloodsport, while Lundgren was still riding the cold, dead stare of Ivan Drago from Rocky IV. So it's clear that this was never going to be a quiet film. The concept is simple and wild in the best way. During the Vietnam War, Van Damme's Luke Devereaux and Lundgren's Andrew Scott kill each other in a brutal standoff. Fast forward a few decades, and the government brings them back to life as reanimated super soldiers under the Unisol program. These guys just follow orders and destroy targets. They don't eat, don't sleep, and just work like machines. And who cares, right? They're already supposed to be dead. But memory's a tricky thing. When past trauma seeps through their programming, all hell breaks loose. What starts as a military sci-fi idea quickly turns into a personal war, with Luke trying to rediscover his humanity and Scott descending into full-blown psychotic madness. The movie had a budget of around $23 million and made nearly double that worldwide, pulling in solid box office numbers for an R-rated sci-fi action flick. But it really exploded once it hit home video. There was something about its mix of slick gunplay and one-liners that scratched a very specific itch in every 90s audience. The Van Damme vs. Lundgren rivalry was the real selling point. Their final warehouse showdown was brutal and loaded with rage. You could feel every punch without the CGI overload or flashy camera tricks. Just two men tearing each other apart like rabid pit bulls. And that's part of what made Universal Soldier work. It was futuristic without feeling fake. The tech was crude ice baths to keep the soldiers' bodies from decomposing, and syringes jamming into necks for neural stability, but it felt believable in a pulpy kind of way. Like if DARPA had watched too many Stallone movies. The impact this film had on the genre is underrated, to say the least. It dropped right after Terminator, and though it never reached those heights, it built on similar fears about soldiers without conscience. The Unisols walked, so concepts like the Metal Gear cyborgs or the Crisis nanosuit soldiers could run. Even shows like Black Mirror would later tap into the same territory of weaponized memory loss and PTSD buried under hardware. It didn't try to be smarter than it was. It just kicked in the door and asked what happens when you erase a man's soul for the sake of control. It's brutal, it's efficient, and it's just the right amount of weird. Universal Soldier nailed that sweet spot between dumb fun and smart sci-fi. Van Damme's confused sincerity clashed perfectly with Lundgren's deranged menace. And there's a young Michael Jai White in a background role. Blink and you'll miss him. Universal Soldier: The Return, 1999, the confusing sequel that killed the theatrical run. By the time Universal Soldier: The Return hit theaters in August of 1999, the sci-fi action genre had moved on. Just months earlier, The Matrix had melted everyone's brains with bullet time and cyberpunk philosophy. And here came Van Damme again, back in the role of Luke Devereaux, but this time, he's somehow human, and also has a daughter. And surprise, he's working for the government. I mean, no shit. They froze him in the previous one. Let's just say it was messy from frame one. Directed by Mick Rogers, who made his directorial debut, by the way, this sequel had a $45 million budget, but felt like it was written during a lunch break. The plot kicks off with Luke finally alive, but they barely get into explaining it. He's now working as a technical advisor for the new Unisol program to help develop the next-gen soldiers and an AI system named Seth, self-evolving thought helix. Naturally, the AI goes rogue and takes over the lab. In that process, it also tries to eliminate Luke and his daughter. The tone lurches wildly from edgy sci-fi to cartoonish action. There are robotic villains doing flying kicks, and wrestler Goldberg as an evil Unisol named Romeo, who looks like he wandered in from a WWF SmackDown taping. And in case the subtlety wasn't already dead, Seth eventually downloads himself into a new body played by Michael Jai White, who tries to bring gravitas to lines like, "The age of mankind is over." This movie ignores nearly every rule from the first one. The moral horror of resurrecting dead soldiers is gone, and the trauma is also nowhere to be found. Instead, the return turns into a full-blown shoot-'em-up with motorcycles, laser cannons, and cheesy one-liners like, "I'm the future, Luke." The pacing feels frantic, but not in a good way, because it races through plot points without building tension or emotional stakes. The fight scenes are flashy, but over-edited, and therefore they lose impact. I mean, it was things like this that made the original satisfying. The final showdown between Van Damme and Jai White is technically slick, but there's no weight to it. So it's basically just two guys flipping around while synth music plays in the background. The film only grossed about $10 million worldwide, which is like a brutal drop from its production budget. Critics slammed it for its incoherent script and lack of originality. Even hardcore fans of the original were confused by the sudden tonal shift. It's movies like these that we call a franchise killer. Van Damme himself later distanced from the project, and it's easy to see why. The once grounded universe was turned into a generic action playground. It's loud and utterly forgettable, like someone dumped Terminator and a Mountain Dew commercial into a blender. The most baffling thing is that the return was meant to relaunch the franchise, but it shelved that for a full decade. I mean, it's like watching a Van Damme parody made by someone who never saw the first movie. The fights are fun, but everything else is hollow. Michael Jai White deserved better. Goldberg's character was named Romeo, but had the emotional range of a traffic cone. All in all, this sequel aged like milk, and left fans wondering what the hell they had just watched. Universal Soldier 2, Brothers in Arms, 1998, the Forgotten Cable movie. In 1998, Universal Soldier 2, Brothers in Arms quietly showed up on cable TV, and it's been quietly ignored ever since. No Van Damme or studio buzz, and barely any fanfare. What we got was a budget version of the original, led by Matt Battaglia. Recasting Van Damme was bold. It's usually the actresses that take that hit. But recasting him with a linebacker? That's a choice. The story picks up right after the first film, or at least it claims to. Luke and Veronica are on the run, trying to expose the Unisol program. That's the setup, but everything feels low effort. There's a weird sense of déjà vu, as if someone watched the first Universal Soldier, wrote it down from memory, and filmed it over a weekend. This film ignores the return completely, and technically came out before the return anyway, but it also contradicts key elements from the original. Devereaux still behaves like a flat, emotionally detached soldier, which makes no sense if you're continuing from the 1992 arc where he was regaining his humanity. Here, he's back to being a robot with biceps. Also, they try to humanize him with a long-lost brother storyline, which feels like soap opera filler. But I guess the real issue, though, is the production value. The scenes that should be tense feel like rehearsals. The music sounds like it was lifted from a discount action reel, and it all plays out like a passionless cover band playing a familiar tune badly. Like a Universal Soldier tribute band with no instruments, Matt Battaglia gives it a shot, but the film looks and feels like a Sci-Fi Channel filler. Gary Busey was reportedly considered for a villain role, which somehow would have made this even weirder. Spoiler alert, the movie ends, and you forget it immediately. Universal Soldier 3, Unfinished Business, 1998, still unfinished. Shot back-to-back with Part 2, Unfinished Business dropped just months later on the same cable network, with the same cast, and somehow even less story. It was supposed to wrap up the arc started in Brothers in Arms, but all it really does is tie a limp ribbon around a package no one wanted in the first place. Luke Devereaux, still played by Matt Battaglia, is back doing more wooden dialogue and slow-motion stunts. Veronica, also returning, tries to break a story on the corrupt Unisol program, while Luke reunites with his long-lost brother Eric, who's been converted into a Unisol. This emotional angle of brother versus brother is where the film really starts to wobble. It wants to have heart, but the execution feels like a late-night fan film. Even the heartfelt speeches are delivered with the energy of someone reading cereal ingredients. It reuses stock footage from Part 2, and a good chunk of the runtime feels padded. There's a lengthy sequence of Luke wandering around the Unisol lab like he's lost his keys. Meanwhile, the emotional climax between the two brothers lands badly. It's not bad because of the budget, it's bad because it has nothing new to say. They spent 2 whole movies trying to recapture the magic of 1992 and ended up delivering the cinematic equivalent of white noise. Worse still, Van Damme never appears. Not even a cameo, just more Battaglia, trying hard but clearly handcuffed by a weak script and bargain bin direction. You could skip both sequels and not miss a thing, which is exactly what most people did. It's called Unfinished Business, and they weren't kidding. The entire movie feels like an extended post-credits scene that never ends. It's all build-up and no payoff. Here's some fun trivia. It was filmed in Canada with a budget so low they reused extras as soldiers in different scenes. Even the soundtrack repeats itself. Universal Soldier Regeneration, 2009. The surprising comeback. By the time Universal Soldier Regeneration dropped in 2009, the franchise was a mess. After the solid original in 1992, things took a nosedive with 2 low-budget cable sequels and the cartoonish Universal Soldier: The Return in 1999. Most fans had written it off completely. But instead of trying to continue that tangled mess, director John Hyams made the smartest move possible: start fresh and ignore everything after the original film. No winks, no nostalgia bait, just a stripped-down, grounded sci-fi action film. The story is simple, but the tone is what sets it apart. A group of separatists has taken control of the Chernobyl nuclear plant and kidnapped the children of the Prime Minister. They've reactivated a next-generation Unisol played by Andrei Arlovsky, former UFC heavyweight champion, who's faster, stronger, and meaner than anything before. When the US military sends its own Unisols to handle the threat, they're torn apart. The last hope is Luke Devereaux, the original Unisol who's now living in isolation under psychiatric care and trying to reintegrate into society. He's traumatized and far from the clean-cut soldier we knew in '92. The movie feels like a cold, Soviet-era factory left to rot. The action is brutal and intimate. Handheld cameras follow the fights up close. There's no shaky cam nonsense. In fact, you actually see every blow connect. A standout scene has Devereaux storming through a corridor in one long, continuous take, tearing through armed guards without any cuts or CGI. It's violent in a way that feels totally believable for super soldiers. Van Damme, now older and visibly weathered, gives one of his quietest and most focused performances. Devereaux is tired. In fact, he is so tired that he is unsure if he's even human anymore. There's a sadness to him that makes the violence hit harder. He's not trying to be a hero. He's just trying to finish the job and get out. The return of Dolph Lundgren as Andrew Scott is a surprise and handled well. He's not exactly the same guy from the first film, though. He's a clone, another government experiment. But there's still enough of that crazed edge that made Scott such a memorable villain. His scenes with Devereaux are tense and ugly, especially during their final confrontation, which ends in a brutal, no-music fight inside a broken-down lab. One of the smartest choices this film makes is refusing to spoon-feed exposition. It expects you to keep up and doesn't waste time explaining the tech, the government's motives, or who built what clone. You get enough to follow the mission, And that's it. The rest plays out through action and mood. There's a lot of silence in this movie, with long stretches without dialogue, but it never feels slow. What's shocking is how grounded it all feels, especially considering it's a movie about genetically modified zombie soldiers. It owes more to Children of Men or The Bourne Ultimatum than to the explosion-heavy action films of the 2000s. There's a cold logic to the world, and everything moves with purpose. This film shouldn't work, but it does. Regeneration is stripped down and unapologetically violent. Van Damme and Lundgren return without fanfare, and every punch feels like it hurts. It quietly became one of the best direct-to-video action films of the decade. Surprisingly, it was shot in Bulgaria on a tight budget. Universal Soldier: Day of Reckoning 2012. The art house death trip. After the surprisingly effective reboot that was Universal Soldier: Regeneration, no one expected the follow-up to swing even harder in the opposite direction. But Universal Soldier: Day of Reckoning from 2012, again directed by John Hyams, was a philosophical descent into madness wrapped inside a brutal action film. It alienated longtime fans and confused casual viewers, but earned a cult following for doing something most franchise films are too scared to do. That would be to burn it all down and rebuild it as something unrecognizable. The plot kicks off with a gut punch. A man named John watches helplessly as masked men murder his wife and daughter in front of him. The leader of this gang is Luke Devereaux, the so-called hero of the original films. From that point forward, the movie follows John's search for answers as he slowly uncovers the horrifying truth about who he really is and what's been done to his mind. This isn't an action movie that cares about military missions. This one is a story about identity collapse. John is constantly hallucinating and experiencing painful flashbacks that may or may not be real. The deeper he goes, the less control he has over his thoughts. Every character he meets speaks cryptically, and even the violence feels detached from reality. Scott Adkins is the perfect lead for this, not just because he's a phenomenal martial artist, but because he sells the horror of realizing your whole life might be a lie. His performance is surprisingly introspective for a genre that usually relies on explosions. The camera often lingers on his face longer than expected, which shows his fear instead of confidence. And when Van Damme finally shows up bald and pale, he looks like a cult leader. This is not the Devereaux we remember. He's created a breakaway army of rogue Unisouls, and he speaks like a man who's been broken and reprogrammed 100 times. Dolph Lundgren's Andrew Scott is also back, but like in Regeneration, this is a clone. He's not even pretending to be the old villain anymore, because now he's more of a brainwashed soldier on autopilot. One of the most striking things about this movie is its visual style. The lighting is harsh and surreal, especially in the underground lairs and Stark government labs. There are extended scenes that feel more like a nightmare. In some ways, it owes more to David Lynch than to anything in the Van Damme canon. But for all its cerebral tone, the action scenes are downright punishing. One of the best is a long-take brawl between Adkins and Arlovsky in a sporting goods store without any flashy music. It's raw and animalistic, without the shaky cam. Another highlight is a hallway axe fight that plays like a horror movie. What really sets this apart is that it has zero interest in fan service. There's no nostalgia here. You don't get triumphant music cues or character redemption arcs. Van Damme isn't even in the film that much, and when he is, he's distant and cold. It's a bold move to take your franchise lead and turn him into kind of a ghost present. There's no clean resolution either. The final moments leave you questioning everything you just watched. Was John even real? Was he just another weapon? What does free will mean if your memories are programmed? These are the kinds of questions the film is more interested in than heroism. Day of Reckoning is less a sequel and more a psychological fever dream with explosions. It ditches all franchise rules and dives into an identity crisis on top of brutal fights and moody pacing. Some horror elements make it unforgettable, though not for everyone. Easily one of the boldest action films of the 2010s. The timeline mess. Alright, let's be honest. Trying to figure out the timeline in the Universal Soldier franchise is like trying to piece together a broken mirror while blindfolded. Every time you think you've got it figured out, another sequel crawls out of the woodwork and says, Forget everything you know, we're doing something different now. So let's start at the beginning, where things were at least pretending to make sense. Universal Soldier from 1992 gives us Luke Devereaux and Andrew Scott, aka dead Vietnam soldiers turned into reanimated government killing machines. A clean arc, some solid action, and a proper ending. Then comes Universal Soldier: The Return in 1999, and everything goes straight off the rails. In The Return, Luke is somehow fully human again without an explanation. It's just like, hey, he's cured now. Let's fight a rogue AI and a wrestler named Romeo. Oh, and by the way, he has a daughter now. Where did she come from? Who knows? It plays like a Saturday morning cartoon rather than a continuation of a sci-fi action film. It was so off the mark that even the studio quietly swept it under the rug. Not to forget, before The Return, there were two made-for-TV sequels in 1998's Universal Soldier 2: Brothers in Arms and Universal Soldier 3: Unfinished Business. Both starred none of the original cast and had the budget of a community college film project, and went out of their way to create an entirely new narrative. These films tried to build their own canon with new villains and new tech. But let's be real, no one talks about them for a reason. Even the franchise itself acts like it was a one-night stand that they're too embarrassed to accept. Then 2009 rolls in with Universal Soldier: Regeneration, and it just nukes everything that came before. Van Damme is back, but the return never happened and the daughter is gone. He's a worn-down Unisol again, thrown back into cold military labs and experimental trauma. And guess what? Andrew Scott shows up again too, and this time he is resurrected. But again, no one really explains it. I guess it's just, Dolph's back, deal with it. By the time we get to Day of Reckoning in 2012, continuity is flat out dead. Our OG hero is now a dead-eyed cult leader orchestrating a revolution of rogue Unisols. Is he the same clone, or a figment of Scott Adkins' traumatized mind? The film doesn't care, and honestly, neither should we. At this point, each entry is basically fan fiction with a budget. There is no consistent timeline. Characters die and come back with zero explanation. Even the technologies are introduced and then abandoned. It's like one movie pretends Unisols are secret, and the next has them running through cities like open warfare. It's like each filmmaker was given a basic pitch. There's this super soldier named Luke, and well, just go nuts. The timeline is so broken, it's not even worth fixing. The best way to enjoy Universal Soldier is to treat each movie like a separate myth. And honestly, that might be the most honest part of the franchise. Legacy of the franchise: tech and testosterone. At first glance, the Universal Soldier franchise might seem like it's all flying fists and exploding helicopters. I mean, that's definitely part of the charm. But buried under all the bullets and broken necks, this series has always been playing with surprisingly rich themes, some more successfully than others, but the effort is there. Let's start with the obvious one: PTSD and trauma. In the original 1992 film, Jean-Claude Van Damme's Luke Devereaux is a war-damaged soul caught in an endless loop. His memories of Vietnam are in the way, clawing its way through the programming. That was something different for early 90s action flicks. Instead of just building a tougher Terminator, Universal Soldier asked whether the soldier even wants to fight or not. Then there's dehumanization through technology. The Unisols are literally war machines, stripped of identity and autonomy, monitored by cold-hearted scientists. You can draw a straight line from this to real-world concerns on DARPA experiments, cybernetics, and drone warfare. The franchise got there early, showing how turning humans into hardware doesn't just remove pain, it removes choice. The soldiers are no longer men, but simply inventory. By the time we hit the later films, especially Day of Reckoning, things get existential. The focus shifts from war trauma to identity collapse. You've got memory implants, sleeper agents, all wrapped up in a surreal, almost dreamlike presentation. Scott Adkins' character is a man trying to figure out whether his entire life was manufactured. Like I said before, the film leans way more into psychological horror than action. And let's not ignore the testosterone-fueled spectacle that made this series iconic. iconic. Van Damme and Lundgren become instant poster boys for the 90s action boom. Their presence here helped solidify the visual language of that era of stoic badasses doing brutal one-on-one showdowns. The final fight in the original film with Van Damme, bloodied and furious, going full beast mode against Dolph, cemented their legendary status. In terms of pop culture influence, the franchise quietly left its fingerprints on a bunch of things. You can see echoes of Universal Soldier in games like Metal Gear Solid, Crisis, or even Call of Duty's Black Ops Super Soldier arcs. It even pops up in episodes of Black Mirror, especially ones exploring mind control and military ethics. There were comic book adaptations, knockoff movies, and even action figures for a hot minute. The series never became Terminator-level mainstream, but it stuck around because it kept evolving. It tried new tones. It tackled deeper themes. It gave us iconic action stars punching their way through sci-fi morality plays, and somehow, it never fully disappeared. Could there be a future for Universal Soldier? The Universal Soldier franchise has died, resurrected, rebooted, ignored itself, and gone full psychological horror, all without ever getting a clean break. But could it actually make a comeback that sticks? Surprisingly, the answer is not as far-fetched as it sounds. Let's talk facts. There's no official reboot in the pipeline as of now, but Scott Adkins, who headlined Day of Reckoning, has hinted a few times that he'd return if the material was right. Dolph Lundgren also never fully closed the door, and let's face it, he could still crush skulls with one hand. Van Damme is a little more selective these days, but nostalgia is a hell of a drug. And then, he did show up in Regeneration and Day of Reckoning after supposedly being done for good with it. So clearly, this universe has some magnetic pull. More importantly, the market's actually hungry for the kind of brutal, grounded sci-fi stuff Universal Soldier was quietly doing before it became cool again. Shows like The Boys, Fallout, Black Mirror, and Dread have proven that audiences are into morally murky worlds and enhanced humans with the kind of themes that mess with your soul. That's exactly the sandbox this franchise was playing in as far back as 1992. It just never had the cultural prestige to cash in at the time. So yeah, there's space for a comeback, but it's gotta be done right. What Universal Soldier needs now isn't another flashy CGI-filled mess or another timeline reset. It needs a smaller, meaner story, the one that dials in on a single soldier. Things might work if they focus on character over spectacle. The best parts of Regeneration and Day of Reckoning worked because they treated the Unisoul as a tragic figure. Some other things might help, like keeping the fights brutal and practical, go handheld with the camera, make the audience feel the punches, make the tech feel real, not Marvel polished. And for the love of continuity, ditch it. No one needs another chart to figure out if Luke is dead, cloned, mind-controlled, or all three at once. Start fresh. Take the original premise of dead soldiers reprogrammed into weapons and build something new from that spine. We also don't need no legacy characters, unless there's a real reason for it. Tone-wise, don't go full popcorn. Keep it cold, introspective, maybe even a little scary. That Children of Men meets Jason Bourne vibe Regeneration had, that's the sweet spot. Toss in a little District 9 energy, maybe some upgrade-style body horror. Let the story punch people in the gut instead of winking at them. And maybe, just maybe, recast with someone unexpected. An actor who's more about emotion than muscle. Not every Universal Soldier needs to look like a UFC heavyweight. Maybe the new version doesn't even want to fight. Maybe they're the first one who figures out how to say no. Because really, that's the core of what Universal Soldier has always been. A fight to stay human in a system designed to erase you. There's still fuel in this franchise. Someone just has to light the right match. Marvelous verdict. And that's the wild ride of the Universal Soldier franchise, full of cloning, mind control, timeline chaos, and the occasional emotional gut punch. From its explosive 90s origins to its art house resurrection, this series did a lot more than people give it credit for. Sure, it lost the plot a few times, literally, but it always swung big. Do let us know your favorite moment from the franchise in the comments below. Something that you either love or love to hate. We're all ears. And if you liked this breakdown, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button so we can bring you more such deep dives. Until then, stay sharp and stay safe.